In which fervor of zeal, transporting him to the omission of the ordinary solemnities of judgment, the Spirit of the Lord places the righteousness and praise of the action. Yet the same call and motion of zeal might have empowered others to do the like. The text speaks of no other call he had, but that of zeal, verses 11, 12, and 13. Yea, another was obliged to do the same upon the ground of that moral command, Deuteronomy 13, verses 6 through 9. Having the ground of God's ordinary judgment, which commandeth the idolater to die the death, and therefore to be imitate of all that prefer the true honor and glory of God to the affection of flesh and wicked princes, as Mr. Knox affirmeth in his conference with Lethington, rehearsed before. Further, let it be inquired, what makes it unimitable? Certainly, it was not so, because he had the motion and direction of God's Spirit, for men have that to all duties. It was not because he was raised and stirred up of God to do it, for God may raise up spirits to imitable actions. It was not because he had an extraordinary call, for men have an extraordinary call to imitable actions, as the apostles had to preach. We grant these actions are extraordinary and unimitable, which, first, do deviate from the rule of common virtue, and transcend all rules of common reason and divine word. But this was not such, but an heroic act of zeal and fortitude. Next, these actions, which are contrary to a moral ordinary command, are unimitable, as the Israelites robbing the Egyptians, borrowing and not paying again, Abraham's offering his son Isaac, but this was not such. Next, those actions which are done upon some special mandate of God, and are not within the compass of ordinary obedience to the ordinary rule, are unimitable, but this is not such, as also miraculous actions, and such as are done by the extraordinary inspiration of the Spirit of God, as Elias is killing the captains with their 50s by fire from heaven. But none can reckon this among these. See Just Populi, at length discussing this point, and pleading for the suitableness of this action. Cap 20. If therefore the Lord did not only raise up this Phinehas to that particular act of justice, but also warrant and accept him therein, and reward him therefore upon the account of his zeal, when there was a godly and zealous magistrate able, and whom we cannot without breach of charity presume, but also willing to execute justice, how much more may it be pleaded that the Lord, who is the same yesterday, today, and forever, will not only pour out of that same Spirit upon others, but also, when he gives it, both allow them, though they be but private persons, and also call them, being otherwise in a physical and probable capacity to do these things, in an extremely necessitous and otherwise irrecoverable state of the Church, to which in a more entire condition he doth not call them. And particularly, where there is not only the like or worse provocations, the like necessity of execution of justice and of reformation, for the turning away of wrath and removing of judgments. That was in Phinehas' case, but also when the supreme civil magistrate, the nobles of the kingdom, and other inferior rulers, are not only unwilling to do their duty, but so far corrupted and perverted, that they are become the authors and patronizers of these abominations. Naphtali, Prior Edition, page 23. Thirdly, when the children of Israel served Eglon, the king of Moab, and they cried unto the Lord, he raised them up a deliverer, Ehud the son of Gera, who made a dagger, and brought a present unto Eglon, and put forth his left hand, and took the dagger from his right thigh, and thrust it into his belly. Judges 3, verse 21. That this action was approved will not be doubted, since the Lord raised him up as a deliverer, who by his heroical action commenced it, and, since it was a message from God, and that it was extraordinary, were ridiculous to deny. For sure, this was not the judicial action of a magistrate, neither was Ehud a magistrate at this time, but only the messenger of the people sent with a present. Yet it is imitable in the like case, as from hence many grave authors concluded with the lawfulness of killing a tyrant without a title. Fourth, when the Lord discomfited the host of Jabin, and Sisera his captain fled into the house of Heber the Kenite, Jael, Heber's wife, took a nail of the tent, and went softly unto him, and smote the nail into his temples. Judges 4, verse 21. Of which the prophetess Deborah says, chapter 5, verse 24, quote, Blessed above women shall Jael the wife of Heber the Kenite be above women in the tent, unquote. Yet not only was Jael no magistrate, but in subjection to, and at peace with Jabin, though she killed his captain. But there was no injustice here. When he was declared a public enemy, the war was just. He was an oppressor of the people of God. It became Jael, as a member of the commonwealth, to betray and cut off the common enemy. Therefore, Jael had sinned if she had not killed him. Martyr and others cited in Poole, synopsis critic upon the place, albeit that author himself, in his English annotations, does cut the knot instead of loosing it, in denying Deborah's song to be divinely inspired in its first composure, but only recorded as a history by divine inspiration, as other historical passages not proven, only because this heroic fact of jail is there recommended, which is too bold an attempt upon this part of the holy canon of the Scripture, whence we see what inconveniences they are driven to, that deny this principle of natural justice, the lawfulness of cutting off public enemies, to procure the deliverance of the Lord's people. Hence, if it be lawful for private persons under subjection to, and at peace with the public enemies of the Lord's people, to take all advantages to break their yoke, and deliver the oppressed from their bondage by killing their oppressors, it must be much more lawful for such as acknowledge no such subjection or agreement to attempt the same in extreme necessity. But the former is true, therefore the latter. Fifth, when Samson married the Timnite, and obliged himself by compact to give them 30 sheets and 30 change of garments upon their solving his riddle, the Spirit of the Lord came upon him, and he went down to Ashkelon, and slew 30 men of them, and took their spoil. Judges 14, verse 19. And afterwards, when he lost his wife by the cruelty and treachery of those Philistines, he said unto them, quote, Though you have done this, yet will I be avenged of you, and after that I will cease. And he smote them hip and thigh with a great slaughter. Unquote. Judges 15, verses 7 and 8. And when the Jews who acknowledged the Philistines for rulers came to Etam to expostulate with him, all the satisfaction he gave them was to avouch that as they had done unto him, so he had done unto them, and to kill 1,000 more of them. Verse 11, etc. These were extraordinary heroic facts, not only because they flowed from an extraordinary power wherewith he was endowed, but from an extraordinary motion and call, but because of his avenging his own private injuries for the public good, in a way both of fortitude and prudence, without a declared war, provoking the enemies against himself, and diverting from the people, and converting against himself all their fury, in which also he acted as a type of Christ, and also because he acted not as a magistrate at this time, for by whom was he called or counted a magistrate? Not by the Philistines, nor by the men of Judah, for they tell him that the Philistines were their lords, and they bound him and delivered him up to them. Yet in his private capacity, in that extraordinary exigence, he avenged himself and his country against his public enemies by a clandestine war, which is imitable in the like case, when a prevailing faction of murdering enemies domineer over and destroy the people of God, and there is no other way to be delivered from them. For his ground was moral, because they were public enemies, to whom he might do as they did to him. Hence, if saints sometimes, in cases of necessity, may do unto their public enemies as they have done unto them, in prosecuting a war not declared against them, then much more may they do so in cases of necessity to deliver themselves from their murdering violence when a war is declared. But here is an example of the former. Ergo, sixth, when these same Philistines again invaded and overran the land in the time of Saul, Jonathan his son and his armor-bearer fell upon the garrison of these uncircumcised and killed them. 1 Samuel 14, verse 6 and 13. This was an heroic action without public authority, for he told not his father, verse 1, and singular indeed in respect of the effect, and were attempting to assault such a multitude, as it were to imitate Samson in his exploits. But in this respect these actions are unimitable in consideration of prudence, not of conscience, or as the lawfulness of the thing. Their ground was moral to cut off public enemies. Hence, if it be lawful to fall upon a garrison of public enemies oppressing the country, then it must be lawful to fall upon one or two that are the ringleaders of public enemies, and main promoters of their destruction, that are as pernicious, and have no more right or power than the Philistines. But such is the case of those about whom the question is. Seventh, when David dwelt in the country of the Philistines, he and his men went up and invaded the Geshurites, and the Gezerites, and the Amalekites. And David smote the land and left neither man nor woman alive. 1 Samuel 27, verses 8 and 9. This was without public authority, having none from Saul, none from Achish, in whose country he dwelt, and none of his own, being no magistrate. We deny not the divine motion, but plead that it is imitable from its moral ground, which was that command to cut off the Amalekites, Exodus 17, and the Amorites, whose relics these nations were. the same ground that Saul, the magistrate, had to destroy them. Whence it is lawful sometimes for others than magistrates to do that which is incumbent to magistrates when they neglect their duty. All I plead for from it is, if it be lawful for private persons, upon the call of God, to cut off their public enemies, when they are obliged by the command of God to destroy them, though they be living quietly and peaceably in the country, then it may be lawful in cases of necessity for private persons to cut off their public enemies, whom they are obliged by the covenant of God to bring to condign punishment, and to extirpate them, as the covenant obliges in reference to malignant incendiaries, when they are ravening like lions for their prey. 8th, in the days of Ahab and Jezebel's tyranny, whereby the idolatrous prophets of Baal were not punished according to the law, Elijah said unto the people, quote, Take the prophets of Baal, let none of them escape. And they took them to the brook Kishon, and slew them there. Unquote. 1 Kings 18, verse 40. How Mr. Knox improved this passage we heard before in the historical representation. And Just Populi vindicates it, that in some cases private persons may execute judgment on malefactors after the example of Elias here, which fact Peter Martyr in Locum defendeth thus, quote, I say it was done by the law of God, for Deuteronomy 18, verse 20, God discerned that the false prophet should die. In chapter 17, the same is said of private men and women who would worship idols. But chapter 13, not only is death threatened against a seducing prophet, but a command is added, that no man should spare his brethren. Thirdly, it is commanded that the whole city, when it becometh idolatrous, should be cut off by fire and sword. Unquote. And Leviticus 24, verses 14 and 16, it is statute that the blasphemer should not live. Quote, to which we may add the law or equity of taliation, for these prophets of Baal caused Jezebel and Ahab killed the servants of the Lord. Unquote. See Just Populi, Cap 20, page 425. Upon this also, Mr. Mitchell defends his fact as above. Quote, also Elijah, by virtue of that precept, Deuteronomy 13, gave commandment to the people to destroy Baal's priests, contrary to the command of the seducing magistrate, who was not only remiss and negligent in executing justice, but became a protector and defender of the seducers. Then and in that case, I suppose the Christian's duty not to be very dark. Unquote. 9th, this idolatrous and tyrannical house was afterwards condignly punished by Jehu, 2 Kings 9 and 10, who destroyed all the idolaters, who were before encouraged and protected by that court, chapter 10, verse 25. This extraordinary fact was not justified by his magisterial authority, for that was as extraordinary as the fact itself, and conferred as a mean to accomplish the fact. He had no authority by the people's suffrages, nor was he acknowledged as such by the court or body of the people. Only the Lord gave it extraordinarily. But it is not the imitation of his assumption of authority that is here pleaded for, but the imitation of his fact in extraordinary cases, when not only tyrants and idolaters pass unpunished, but their insolency in murdering the innocent is intolerable. Mr. Knox vindicates this at length, as before, and shows that it had the ground of God's ordinary judgment, which commands the idolater to die, the death. And that though we must not indeed follow extraordinary examples, if the example repugn to the law, but where it agrees with and is the execution of the law, an example uncondemned stands for a command. For God is constant, and will not condemn in ages subsequent what he has approved in his servants before. See the testimony of period 3 above, and Just Populi, cap 20, page 418. 10th, when Athaliah, the mother of Ahaziah, had tyrannized 6 years, at length Jehoiada, with others, made a conspiracy against her to depose her, and made Joash king, which when it was discovered, she cried, Treason, treason, as indeed it would have been so if she had been the lawful magistrate. For it was an attempt of subjects against her that had the possession of the sovereign power. But Jehoiada commanded the captains to heave her forth without the ranges, and him that followeth her kill with the sword. And they laid hands on her, and she was slain. 2 Kings 11, verses 14 through 16. That this is imitable in the punishment of tyrants is cleared above. If therefore it be lawful for subjects to kill usurping tyrants and such as follow them to help them, under whom nevertheless people might have a life, then it must be lawful for private persons to put forth their hand against their cutthroat emissaries in a case of necessity, when there is no living for them. 11th. When Amaziah turned idolater and tyrant, after the time that he turned away from the Lord, they made a conspiracy against him in Jerusalem, and he fled to Lachish. But they sent to Lachish after him, and slew him there. Chronicles 25, verse 27. This fact is before vindicated by Mr. Knox, period 3, afterward in head 2 and head 5.